A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. I'm Ritvika Gupta. As part of our World MSME Day celebration this whole week, we're going to try and understand how the meaning of entrepreneurship has evolved over the years and whether India has the right infrastructure and enough resources to support mass entrepreneurship. To answer all that and more, I'll be in an exclusive conversation with Ravi Venkatesan, founder, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. Joining me live right now is Ravi Venkatesan, founder, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. Hi, Ravi. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hello, Ritvika. Nice to be in conversation.
So sometime last year, Ravi, you wrote in one of your LinkedIn posts that the 21st century will be a century of entrepreneurship. Talk to us about how the definition of entrepreneurship has perhaps changed over the years, and where does India stand today on the global stage?
Certainly. If you think about how India has changed just in the last decade, I think one of the most phenomenal ways has been this explosion of entrepreneurial activity. All the unicorns, the amount of venture capital flowing into our country, and so on. The problem, however, is that it is fairly concentrated. Much of what we celebrate are tech-enabled startups in a few cities like Bangalore or Gurgaon or Mumbai, Pune. And, today what we need to see in India and all over the world is a much more widespread entrepreneurship, an entrepreneurial movement across every town, every city, every village. We want not just the, people with pedigrees like IIT degrees starting businesses. You want ordinary people with no great, background coming forward, not to, apply for a job, but actually start a business of any sort. It could be mundane, ordinary businesses like, installing solar or a beauty salon or a food business. So I think what we want to see is a democratization of entrepreneurship instead of just celebrating what we do today. When you look at some of the big changes that need to happen in the world, for instance, India needs to move to, the whole world needs to move towards renewable energy, more sustainable businesses. These things cannot be driven just by existing businesses. It's not driven by government. It is driven by lots of entrepreneurs, some of them quite small, but a few of them growing to become larger. And so no matter what you talk about, it is informed and driven by millions of entrepreneurs all across the country and all across the world. So this is the big shift that GAME, the organization I'm part of, is trying to catalyze first in India and then all over the world.
We are celebrating our World MSME Day this week, and the theme for our show this season is Ideas for New India. So tell us, what are some of the big ideas, or the ways through which MSMEs can contribute to the growth of India's economy and the vision for a new India?
Fantastic. Look, India has a huge MSME sector. We have about 6 crore enterprises here, 63 million to be exact. And they contribute about a third of the GDP and at least a half of all the employment. And so in India, like everywhere, it is this sector that is the largest engine of employment and job creation. And so if this is healthy, the country and our economy is healthy. And if it is, sick, we have a real problem. Now, in India, although we have a very large number of businesses, most of them are small or stunted. So, the vast majority of these are informal enterprises, and they are not growing. Most 98% of them employ less than 10 people. And so for India to flourish, we need all these businesses to be much more dynamic, much more vibrant, growing, and that's how jobs get created. Now, we're all very, very excited about India's economic prospects, $3.5 trillion economy, GDP growing to 5 trillion, then 10 trillion. But the nature of this growth is really important, Ritvika. If it is just 100 or even 1,000 big companies growing bigger, it means a very concentrated form of prosperity. And what India needs is very widespread distributed prosperity. The growth cannot come from just a few companies. It has to come from millions of enterprises. Those can't just be in our top 100 cities. It has to be in at least 1,000 district headquarters, etc. So the big idea that we have, is how do you create a much more widespread, much more distributed growth? So one of the interesting questions that we've been examining is, why are the vast majority of our small and medium businesses not growing? Why are they stunted? And the answer is, businesses grow when the ecosystem in that city or town is healthy. So you take a place like Bangalore, where I live and where I work. Why is there so much entrepreneurial activity? Why are so many new firms starting every week, every month? Why are so many of them growing fast and some of them becoming unicorns? It has to do with the health of the local ecosystem. So start with the seed, which is young people. Most young people in Bangalore aren't really looking for a job. Most of them, or a large number of them, want to start their own businesses sooner or later. So if you go to many other parts of our country, most young people want a job, and that too, the preference is for a government job, which may or may not exist. So one of the challenges we have to overcome is, how do we get millions of our young people below the age of 24 exposed to entrepreneurship, so their primary interest is to start their own business someday. The next thing about the ecosystem that in Bangalore is, there are lots of networks. So people are networks, so you have lots of groups that will give you ideas on what kind of business to start. You can get help in terms of starting your business. There are venture capitalists, there's private equity, there are providers of debt. So the whole network is very well developed. There are incubators, there are accelerators, all this form of infrastructure. Digital connectivity is there, access to energy, roads, all this form of infrastructure is there. Again, this exists to a much less extent in other parts of our country, particularly as we move into peri-urban and rural India.
Ravi, I also read that you are planning to launch the NBFC Growth Accelerator Program to really ease funding. Tell us more about that, and what advice would you offer to MSMEs in India about securing funding and investment?
So one of the big challenges a small business has today is access to credit formally and at affordable rates of interest. It turns out that only 15% of our micro or small businesses is able to access credit formally. And for the rest, what you have to do is either just bootstrap your way, or you borrow at exorbitant interest rates, which could be north of 30-40%. What happens, Ritvika, when you borrow at such high rates, or you can't get a loan at all, is you do not invest in growing. So you cannot invest, for instance, in inventory or working capital. You can't invest in buying a computer. You can't invest in upgrading your machinery. You can't invest in training your employees. And that's one of the primary reasons why we are seeing not enough new business formation and not enough growth. So when we look at why it is so hard for a first-time entrepreneur or a business that doesn't have a lot of collateral, why is it so hard for them to borrow money? It turns out that the whole ecosystem is a bit broken. So most of them borrow money not from large banks, but from small non-banking finance companies, fintechs, etc. Now, the large banks tend to not want to lend to small businesses for a variety of reasons. One is the ticket size is small and the cost of customer acquisition is very high. So it's not worth it. The second thing is they don't know how to assess risk of such businesses, particularly where they don't have collateral assets to pledge. And so what you find is the big private sector banks, whether it's HDFC or ICICI or Axis, they tend to serve only the cream, the larger, more established businesses.
It's time for a quick break here. We'll be back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. In this segment, we discuss how the landscape has changed for women entrepreneurs in India and much more. Listen in. So tell me, in your opinion, do we have the right infrastructure and enough resources to support mass entrepreneurship? If not, what sort of support is required from policymakers, stakeholders, and the government?
So the best way I can talk about what infrastructure is needed to support the explosion of entrepreneurship across the country, the growth of small businesses across the country. I would use an example of growing a garden. If you want a nice garden, you have to plant the right seeds, you have to make sure the soil is good and that the climate is fine, and if these three things are fine, the garden is beautiful. In this instance, what you need to make sure is that the supply of talent with the right skills and an entrepreneurial ambition is there. And for that, we have to introduce entrepreneurship in the curriculum of every school, every college. Just like we learn maths, we should make sure that every young person is exposed to entrepreneurship. And so right now, for instance, GAME and our partners, we're running entrepreneurship programs in 8 states. And by the end of this year, 4 million kids every year are going to go through the program. And we hope that by the end of the decade, every young person is exposed to it. The second, as you said, is infrastructure. Infrastructure means what? Roads, access to electricity, internet connectivity, all these things. And the good news in India is we're galloping and making huge strides in terms of all forms of infrastructure development, particularly access to the internet. So on this dimension, we're doing quite well. But then access to capital is a big issue still today for most businesses. And so we need to do better both in terms of policy as well as getting the much larger quantum of both equity and debt available for small businesses.
India has built a strong base of digital architecture, to develop apps like UPI, Aadhaar, DigiLocker. Where do you think we are as far as digitization is concerned in the MSME ecosystem? And going forward, what do you think will be the role of AI in driving growth?
Of course, everybody is excited about AI. But Ritvika, I think, again, in just the last 5, 7, 8 years, India has made enormous strides in terms of digitizing society, digitizing the economy. So one is, of course, the pervasiveness of access to the internet. When I was running Microsoft up to a decade ago, we had just about 15 million PCs and less than 100 million internet connections. Today, everybody has a smartphone virtually. Everybody has access to the internet at some speed. So that's phenomenal. Then, of course, in the India stack with Aadhaar, UPI has been huge. We are also seeing the emergence of marketplaces of all sides, B2B, B2C, like Amazon, like Flipkart, and many other, Udaan, and so many other marketplaces. So the building blocks of the digital infrastructure are there. However, when you look at the 63 million small businesses and micro businesses, most of them are still to get on the digital on-ramp. And the reasons are many. One of the reasons is that the cost is still quite high, despite all the advances we've made. And so continuing to find ways to bring down the cost of access to the cloud, for instance, cloud services for MSMEs is important. Access to capital, I already talked about, huge issue. So the ability of a micro business to invest actually in technology to take advantage of all this is low. Skilling is huge. Most of them don't even know what exists, what they can use. And so much more hand-holding at the grassroots level is important. So I think it's now about doing a lot to enable what Rohini Nilekani calls the first mile, not the last mile. So empowering the front line, working with hand-holding these small businesses, bringing down costs is very important.
And how do you perceive the current landscape of women entrepreneurship in India? And what potential advantages are associated with companies led by women?
Yeah, so one of the particular focus areas we have is around women entrepreneurs. It's challenging to be an entrepreneur in India and to start a business, but it is even more daunting if you're a woman, which is why only 16% of all businesses are women-owned. And if you actually look at businesses of any size, 5 or 10 employees or more, that number drops to single digits. And obviously that's a big problem. So GAME and our partners, we've been trying to understand what are the particular headwinds or challenges that women entrepreneurs face. Well, a lot of it is societal attitudes towards women in the workplace or women starting their own businesses. And so what we need to do is create a lot more societal interventions that result in it being okay for a woman to start a business. And here, the more role models of success that we can amplify and shine the spotlight on, the more women are going to get inspired and say, well, if she can do it, we can do it too. Fortunately, a lot of that's happening even without us. When there's a Falguni Nair or someone like that who starts a business like Nykaa worth 10 billion, wow, it just changes how everybody thinks about what women entrepreneurs are capable of. I think the most important idea that we have is that entrepreneurship should not be the prerogative of a small number of people, living in a few large cities, who know how to use technology and know how to access venture capital. This has to be democratized. It needs to be a very widespread, dispersed activity. So an ordinary person with no great skills or pedigree in any remote, part of our country should be able to start a business and grow the business. So that's the central idea. It's all about growth in the number of businesses and growth of existing businesses. That's what creates jobs. India cannot flourish, India cannot have prosperity unless we see a very widespread movement of entrepreneurship. The second very central idea we have is for entrepreneurship to flourish, we need in every district of India, at the very least, so think 800,000 towns and cities, healthy, vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems. So Chandra of Tata Sons, he said, yeah, you mean we need to have Bangalore everywhere? And that's, I think, a neat way to think about it. How do we create the conditions of Bangalore and Gurgaon in every district, every small town, every village of India? And I would say those are the big ideas.
Well, thank you, Ravi, for those wonderful insights. It was lovely speaking to you.
Ritvika, I'm grateful to have had this opportunity to share our work.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. We hope you enjoyed this exclusive conversation. Thank you for watching. Good night.